named Tasha Suri recently tweeted, writing emails in 2022 is like, hi X, how's the burnout going? I hope less burning. Unfortunately, I also have burnout, so I can't do the thing that I said I'd do. I realize that this will make your burnout worse, and I am sorry about that. Hoping for less burnout for you soon. Warmly, Y. Which, yeah, clearly resonated with a whole bunch of my friends because it is all over my Facebook feed. As British understatement might put it, the world is a lot right now. It always is, but the last couple of years have just intensified that. Pandemic was and is a lot of work, and we are tired, which is hard because many things still take more work than they did before, which leaves us with even less emotional and motivational energy to face things like the economic and political turmoil that threaten our country right now. Not to mention the war in Ukraine and war and violence everywhere, including our own country. Then on a more individual level, there are job losses and frightening diagnoses and probably a pile of smaller stressors and tasks that have to be done at any given moment. It can get to be too much. There's so much on our to-do list. And there's so much on our to worry about list. Situation that sends most people in one of two directions. Either hyperactivity, in which you stave off the panic, or try to anyway, by running from one task to the next with no time to breathe, or shutdown, in which you, well, shut down. Either way, when I get into this pulpit each week, I am aware that it might feel as though I am simply adding one more thing to one of your lists. Something that you need to do, or something that you need to worry about. Worthy things, one might hope, holy things that burn with God's love, God's justice, and God's mercy, but still, when combined with the panicked edge of life's burnout, things that might well confuse you into thinking that your lived faith, perhaps your entire relationship with God and Jesus, are tasks for you to perform. In other words, to start to believe that your redemption, and the redemption, in fact, of the entire world, lies on your shoulders. That the stress and chaos of your life and the stress and chaos of the world can and should be fixed by you. And if you aren't handling it, then that is on you. Admittedly, to be a Christian is to be called to recognize our responsibility for the world. Following Jesus means that we choose to be guided by his teachings and his actions, which keep us on the right track and they open up our hearts. But that's not actually the good news. I myself have said before that the good news is that the love and the power of Christ will pour into your open heart and work through you. But even that is not the whole of the good news. The good news, especially when you are burned out at a level that might well be unprecedented in your life, is that God knows that you cannot do it all, and that in fact, it is not your job to do it all. So it's okay that you are utterly failing to manage to do it all. Part of the good news is that when it all comes down to it, the salvation of the world is God's job. Only God can truly redeem the world. And all that will come of us forgetting that fact is that we will get completely burned out. So, it seems an excellent day to be reminded of the biblical promise of that redemption, expressed so beautifully in the image of the New Jerusalem. Here in the book of Revelation, as in all apocalyptic literature, a beleaguered community, a truly beleaguered community, finds hope in God's promise to right all wrongs, to overthrow all oppressors, and to return God's people to paradise. Only this time, paradise is not the Garden of Eden, it is a city. It is the New Jerusalem descending to earth to be God's eternal dwelling place with us. This is the end of the world. By which I mean this is the purpose, the ultimate intention, the fulfillment of the world that God made. It is an image of all of creation living in harmony with God and each other, according to the dream that God brought, the dream of God that brought this whole mess into being in the first place. And it is all that we could possibly hope for, and all that we would be working for if we happen to have the energy to get out of bed. And it will happen. Because God will bring it about. God will. It is God's will. In the church world, we are currently in the midst of the season of Easter, which means that we are being invited to see signs of new life and transformation in ourselves and in the world. We are assured that the resurrection makes all things new in some way. It's hard to deny the fact that a lot of things aren't new at all. Many of us still feel worn down and exhausted, despite the sunshine that is gracing us this week. And there is suffering and injustice all around, as there always has been, even with the life-giving power and presence of the risen Christ to fill and guide us. Which is why we still need that promise of the last day, the promise of apocalyptic literature, assuring us that God will gather it all in at the end. We need our sacred story to acknowledge the almost unbearable truth that there are, in fact, sufferings in this world too big to be redeemed during the course of history. And we need to hear that God will eventually redeem every single moment of it. At which point, we will no longer have a to worry about list. The only thing left on our to-do list will be to sing praise to God. That's it. According to the book of Revelation, the ultimate purpose of humanity is to worship God. Which, to be honest, sounds a lot easier than this business of loving one another. Essentially, that was the response that one of you had to last week's sermon. Well, I am certainly glad of the people who have energy to respond to other people's needs, they said, because I am just plain exhausted. To which I would reply, to those of you who are resonating with this idea, never forget that loving one another is a mutual thing. And sometimes just allowing ourselves to be loved is the most profound and significant way that we could live out that commandment. Allow yourself to be cared for. Or if that's not on offer, at least love yourself enough to release the guilt you might feel at not being able to take on every last thing that you've been asked to do in the past week. your tired love will do. Because you aren't the savior of the world. The world is too big for you to save. Heck, the world is too big for the resurrection of Christ to have saved it in the way that we want it to be saved. That will have to wait for the last day, the story of which draws much of its power from a very simple assurance, which is that a great deal of what we see around us is not God's dream for the world, but that God's dream is eternal. It always has been, it is, and it always will be, and someday. God is always dreaming that dream into being. And that some days will have to be enough. Enough, perhaps, to rest back into and soothe your burnt out edges. May it be so. Amen.